Good afternoon. My name is Ciara Torres-Spelliscy. I'm an attorney at the Brennan Center. We are attached to NYU Law School, and I work on the issue of judicial diversity. Earlier this year, I released a report called Improving Judicial Diversity. It's available for free on the Brennan Center's webpage, or if you really feel like paying for it, it's been republished by Westlaw in the book Women and the Law. So I thought I'd start with a historical quote. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America, "The oppressed, referring to blacks, can bring an action at law, but they will find only white male judges." And that was in 1831. Fast forward to 2008. 24 state Supreme Courts are all white, and 2 are all male. At the state appellate level, white men are overrepresented by a margin of nearly 2 to 1 compared to their share of the general population. And consequently, nearly every other demographic group is underrepresented. And one of the reasons that I care about judicial diversity at the state level is you often have state judges go on to the federal bench. And Russ Wheeler of Brookings once said recently, the only way to get a federal judgeship is to be a judge. And that's a bit of hyperbole, but he was basing it on his research. And what he did is he looked at judicial appointments starting with Eisenhower and going through George W. Bush. And in Eisenhower's day, 2/3 of federal judicial appointments came from private practice, and only 1/5 were former judges. But by the time you get to George W. Bush, those numbers have flipped, and now only 1/3 of federal judges come from private practice, and 1/2 come from the bench. And so what happens in Kansas is going to matter for what our bench looks like nationally in the coming years. So in the Brennan Center study, we looked at 10 states, and we were trying to figure out how diversity comes into play during the judicial nominating process. So we interviewed judicial nominating commissioners, and we asked that question. And we got a variety from, I would say, lots of candor to not so much candor. After all, we were talking mostly to attorneys. And so, number one, what they say is only anecdotal. It's only what they can talk to. And because they were attorneys and because you're talking about something that has legal consequences, I think some of them were very careful in what they said to us publicly. And what we found is, overall, diversity on the bench lags behind the diversity of the general population, of the bar, and of the legal population, of the population of law students over the past 20 years. There are still fewer female judges than male, despite the huge influx of female attorneys into the practice. For example, you can really see this at the high state courts, where in 14 state courts there's only 1 female member. In 2 state Supreme Courts there are 0 female members. And I find this sort of jarring because nationally there are, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 325,000 female attorneys working in the United States today. So the idea that you couldn't find enough talented women to be on every state Supreme Court is just, I think, ridiculous. And unfortunately, Kansas has followed a lot of these national trends. Kansas is among that 24 that have an all-white Supreme Court. As we mentioned, as others today have mentioned, the minority judges in Kansas it's a very tiny number. Like in some cases you can count them on one hand, depending on which demographic you're talking about. But what gives me hope is I looked at Kansas University's law school, and I looked at Washburn, and right now in KU, 15.1% of the current law student population is minority, and in Washburn it was 13.6%, and in both schools it was 40% women. So there are people in the pipeline. But I think you really need to think about how you're going to keep your talented students in Kansas. And I was thinking about this, like one of my best friends from college is from Kansas. He has a degree from Harvard, he has a degree from Oxford, he has a degree from Yale. He does not live or work in Kansas.
And is he married?
He is married with a gorgeous son. And so one of the things I think you might want to look at is you have a 10-year Kansas praxis requirement for a lot of your state judgeships. And that does make a lot of sense. It's probably a proxy for maturity. It's a proxy for knowing Kansas law. Yes?
5 years.
Oh, it's 5 now. Okay. That's even better. Because you have a legal population that is very mobile, and you are competing with any national law firm that will pay a larger salary than you will offer a judge. And for me, I think this is a human resources problem. And I come to this from my background of being at Harvard and Columbia and seeing just incredibly brilliant young women and minorities who are now lawyers, and they're wending their way through the legal profession. And I hope that in 10 to 20 years, I will see them on state benches, because as a nation, we need that type of talent on our benches. And if we don't, then we all sort of lose out. But right now, most of my friends who went to law school with me, they're in private practice. Like, I'm the outlier because I'm in a nonprofit. Like, I'm already willing to take pay cuts. But, you know, you have to take the idea of judicial salaries seriously. I'm going to mention 3 different things that we saw depressing the numbers. 1 is judicial salaries. 2 are retention elections. We found that, at least anecdotally, especially minority candidates who were going up for retention elections were getting knocked off. And then a third problem, which some have already alluded to today, is the problem of implicit bias. And I have 2 sort of concrete examples of how implicit bias works, because it's a bit of an abstract concept. 1 is from the world of orchestras. And what orchestras found is when they had people audition for first violin, men often got the job. And so this created a question: were the male violinists actually better than the female violinists? And so they did a thought experiment, and they had people audition behind a curtain, so you couldn't see who was playing.